Good morning, everyone. Millions of people are out of work, and this is not the way we want to reduce emissions. COVID-19 has had us on lockdown for the most part of the year. It has disrupted the way we do business globally. People have lost their jobs, others have had to work from home, and commuting has reduced drastically. All of this are helping slow down the spread of COVID-19. And there are some upsides if we look at it from the environmental perspective. Data shows that air pollution, CO2 emissions have dropped, and we might be experiencing, for the first time in 10 years, a 5% reduction in global emissions. However, there's a downside. There's been an increase in plastic pollution as a result of the use of single-use medical apparels by the frontline workers. It is on this note that I'd like to introduce to you the theme of this webinar series, Ahead of Tomorrow, a view of the post-COVID-19 future for the environment. Indeed, our world has changed, our challenges are greater, our fragilities are being exposed, our systems need a reset. I would like to thank the 11-11-12 Foundation in partnership with the Swedish Embassy for bringing this program together so that we can have conversations on how to move forward. Good morning, everyone. My name is Rukayat Ali Oluwafui, and I'll be moderating this panel session. I'd like to introduce the panelists for today. First on the list is Dr. Amanda Mugadza from Midland State University in Zimbabwe, making the time to come here. And the second on the list is Dr. Emmanuel Onyebo, a senior lecturer at the University of Nigeria, Nsukka. The third person is, thank you, sir, for making it. The third person is Agnes Ansa Osei from Private Financing Advisory Network, the country coordinator in Ghana. Thank you for making it here. So on that note, we'll go to the business of the day. I would like our panelists of and as for we have a few people will be listening in where you can wait in return. Then you can also through the questions menu. Thank you very much. So,
which verse you would want to hear from first?
No, it's fine. You can go first. It's fine.
Oh, okay, right. So I will start as she mentioned, as our moderator mentioned, Agnes from Ghana, and I'll speak briefly on the question she just threw to us. When environmental law started coming very significant in activities of every individual, every institution, with the goal of protecting the environment. So any law it's geared towards protecting, it falls under environmental law, And over the years, we've seen that environmental law sort of overlaps with other laws. And this happens because have environmental aspects. By that, I mean that they have these activities impact or interact with the environment. Food processing, almost every activity. Even now, we know that even for our banking sector, they've had to develop, some countries have had to develop sustainable banking principles just to guide the way they even invest in projects. So now when they are investing in projects, they have to consider the environmental aspects of projects. So environmental law is very broad, environmental policy is very broad, and I believe that most countries in Africa, if not all, have been able to adapt to these changes that have come up over the years. So I think that's what I would say.
Okay, thank you very much. Dr. Mugaza, did you get me? Dr. Mugaza, can you hear me?
Okay. No, it was internet, perhaps the connection stuff.
Okay.
Okay. From what Agnes has said, I mean, I totally agree. It's just environmental law is a broad spectrum of any laws, any regulations that regulate human activities and human interaction with the environment. So it's the interaction in the environment, as Agnes has said, there is in fact no activity under the sun that does not interact with the environment. So environmental law must then begin to influence every single activity.
Okay.
Yes, it's going to be joining us, right?
Okay. So I'll just move on to my questions for the other panelists. So Dr. Miss Agnes, this question is for you. We know that African countries, we have the environmental laws, and we still wonder why we still wallow in a lot of environmental problems. To be sure, what exactly is missing? Thank you.
Okay, what is I think about is awareness. Even though our governments have ratified some treaties, they've signed some treaties and all that. And I by businesses, I would even excuse formal sector. I will talk about the informal sector because on implementation, and I realized that implementation and enforcement and monitoring is very intense in the formal sector, where when businesses are going in for certification and institutions are subscribing to or conforming to all the standards and regulations as far as certain environmental regulations are concerned, or all environmental regulations as far as their businesses are concerned. But when we talk about the informal sectors, we don't see that. For the informal sectors, for instance, when it comes to oil spills, how many people know how to even manage oil spills? When it comes to waste disposals, when you go to the formal sectors, we have bins dedicated for each type of waste. We have organic waste bins, we have plastic waste bins, we have all these things. But when we come to the informal sector, we don't see that. So I think that the problem is very much with implementation, monitoring, and enforcement in the informal sector. Because for the formal sectors, they are aware, very much aware, because even before you are even given the certification, or you are certified to work in a certain space, you are able to, you are put through all these stringent measures to make sure that you conform, your activities conform to the environmental regulations and all that. EPA will make sure that you have to go for certification from EPA. You have to do a whole lot of things. But when it comes to our informal sector, we don't see that. So these are the three main issues that I personally have identified when it comes to the challenges in environmental law as far as Africa is concerned. So there's knowledge, but enforcement and implementation, and even with the knowledge, is not enough, because the formal sector, again, knows much more than the informal sector. How many TV programs even educate us on environmental laws? So I think I'll end here, and I'll just pass it on to Amanda to add on.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much, Ms. Agnes. So in line with your answer, I would like to ask Dr. Amanda, what do you think is responsible for that gap in the informal sector? Could it be that they are not being carried along during policy formulations?
Well, my take is that from the word go, from the get-go, there is no mainstreaming of environmental law and policy in our region, in Africa.
Okay.
Because what I believe is that if from the point of national development have a mainstreaming of environmental protection and environmental management, environmental governance, then what is going to happen is that we already have a filtered down approach of how each and every stakeholder is going to manage, is going to play their role in protecting the environment. Now, if that is not in place, what is going to happen is that you're going to have all these laws, you're going to have all these awareness programs, but without institutional structures to make it work. And all that is because there's no mainstreaming of environmental governance and management in our national development policies and even in our regional development policies. If you look at our normative frameworks on environmental law, you see that there is quite you can actually see evident disjunctures as you go down the levels of influence, the levels of governance from regional, national to local levels. There's that disjuncture. So by the time you get to the people on the ground, to the private sector, to project developers, then you see that it does not happen. And at that point, you also would then anticipate that local communities just don't know what's happening. So for me, it's about mainstreaming environmental governance and management. Yes.
Okay. Thank you very much for that beautiful answer. So my next question goes to Ms. Agnes. We know that the administration of policies have always been a function of governance. Given your experience in capacity building in the environmental sector, can you tell us who is pivotal to achieving the goals of environmental policies? Is it the people, government, or even businesses?
So I think that stakeholder identification is very important at every point in any policy development and even with implementation. So it's very important for any project developer, anybody that is involved in any activity that has environmental aspects, to identify requirements are. And it's very important to adapt the down to top approach, not top to down approach when dealing with these stakeholders. It's important to take in their views, even in developing and implementing the project. So if it has to do with wastewaters, if it has to do with especially when it comes to indigenous people, are there certain places that they are so attached to that if you evacuate them from, or if you move them from, it's going to affect them? How are you going to engage them? So I think that is very important. Stakeholder engagement is very important, and also adapting to the bottom-up approach. So involving them, just as Dr. Amanda mentioned, involve them even in the implementation, policy development in the first place. It's very important for you to engage them right from the beginning to be able to, so once you get to the implementation stage, it becomes easier because they were involved right from the beginning to when implementation is about to take place. So I think that's what I would say.
Okay. Thank you very much, Ms. Agnes. So my next question is for Dr. Amanda. Given your work at the university, I'd like you to tell us if there are specific steps peculiar to policy formulation for environmental issues.
Okay. The steps obviously would depend on exactly what it is that you want to, what environmental law you want to address, what is your goal. So for me, the first thing is to identify the environmental objective. It may be a challenge, but in some instances, it's simply about sustainable use of resources. And in some instances, it's simply about maintenance of environmental quality, maintenance of landscapes and things like that. So it's not always about identification of problems. So one must appreciate at policy making level that what is our environmental objective? And once we have an environmental objective, we want to know who our stakeholders are, who our actors are. And those actors are important because we need to set up an institutional framework. So those frameworks will be informed, first of all, by the objective that we seek to achieve. And under that institutional framework, we're looking at all the governance actors that are involved. And that starts from the public actors, the state actors. Who are our state actors? And that question is twofold. First of all, you look at all levels of governance, right, vertically, but you also need to look at the horizontal.
Il est aussi important de regarder aux facteurs horizontaux.
Actors. And then from there, you identify your non-state actors. Once you identify your non-state actors, these include the private sector. And the private sectors also is twofold. For me, it's twofold because it looks at, first of all, the business sector, all the people, the project developers, but it also considers the landowners. Because whenever we're talking environment, then we're talking of land ownership. So you're looking at also the landowners. There's that also. And from there, you then look at the communities. Who are our primary communities or secondary communities? Then you also look at, under the non-state actors, you also look at all the other external, I call them external entities. This is where we put civil society. This is where we put financial institutions. This is where we put all other interested parties, and including educational institutions like us, the universities. This is where we put. So identification of your actors, your institutional frameworks is important. Once that is done, you then want to know what tools then do we need to implement the policy that we're going to come up with. So for me, the next step is then to identify the legal tools or the policy tools or the implementation tools, if you like. And those tools are very broad, and also they're informed by environmental objective. But for me, at a sub-minimum, as a lawyer, I normally consider the four tools. First of all, your command and control tools, the mandatory tools, etc., to put thresholds, minimum expectations, right? And then from there, you want to have your incentive-based tools. So whatever incentives you want to have people for them to, to comply, for them to buy into the laws, then you also want that. After that, you want to establish agreements. So you want agreement-based tools. So you want everybody to be involved. You want to have agreements at all these different levels of actors. Then finally, of course, we have the stage where we talk about civil-based tools, where we're now looking at remedies whenever there will be, access to justice issues or litigation issues, when we want to solve problems, when we get to the issues of conflict resolution, you want to have your civil-based tools. So those are the tools that we look at. And as well as under the civil-based tools, this is where we also put the whole spectrum of human rights-based tools, because those are civil-based tools as well, civil litigation, etc., etc. So for me, those four become very important at every stage of policy formulation and implementation. So those are the four stages. First of all, you identify your environmental objectives. Secondly, you identify your actors. Thirdly, you identify your tools. So there are three. Yes, I think for me that would work at a minimum, of course.
I think I would want to add something about Amanda's.
Please go on.
Right. So I would say that it's also very important to assess the institution's capacity as far as the policy, that particular policy you want to develop is concerned. Because you can develop a policy and the institution or the organization that is being developed for is not in a position to implement it. So it's very important to assess the institution's capacity. And also it's very important to limit alterations. And by that, I mean that it's easy to effect changes to new businesses than to do so with existing businesses. So, I mean, we can work with existing businesses, but also for the new businesses that are coming up, it's very important to limit alterations by ensuring that the new businesses or the new institutions that are being set up are complying to environmental standards. And also, it's very important to develop a policy that is very clear in its communication. It's very clear in its communication, because just as myself and Dr. Amanda mentioned earlier, you are dealing with a number of stakeholders as far as environmental issues are concerned. So it's very important to make sure that your policy statement is very clear in its communication and is very inclusive. So Dr. Amanda mentioned that there are a number of people that you would have to engage with. So in developing the policy, it has to be inclusive and very transparent in its communication. So I think these are the few things that I'll just add to it.
Thank you very much. So my next question actually goes to you, Miss Agnes. It's common that a lot of time we liken environmental management and sustainability to two sides of a coin. It's very difficult to talk about environmental management and not mention sustainability. So I believe there's a relationship between the two. Can you tell us a bit about that?
I'm not sure if this is addressed to me because the line was breaking at the beginning.
Oh, okay. You didn't get a question?
No.
Oh, okay. Sorry about that. I'll go again. I said we can liken environmental management and sustainability to two sides of a coin, as we hardly talk about environmental management without talking about sustainability. We'd like you to tell us about the relationship between the two concepts. You didn't get that? Wow. Wow. Okay. Did Dr. Amanda get that?
Yes, I did. I perhaps can go on
Okay.
ahead. For me, the relationship between environmental management and sustainability is actually, I wouldn't personally call it a two-sided coin, but I believe for me that sustainability is the broader concept. It's like the mother concept, because what sustainability does for us is to lay out our principles. What do we want to achieve and how will we achieve that? So for instance, if you look at the triple bottom line, you will say what we want to do is we have our economic development. And when we are coming up with, or when we're going to undertake that economic development, we must consider the environment and we must consider the people. So this is what sustainability basically says in very simplistic terms. Now, environmental management then comes in to guide the economic development, right? And then it also then guides and brings in the framework of how people are going to be incorporated into this whole economic development agenda. So the relationship, if I am just to simply say, the relationship is that sustainability sets the framework. It's the mother principle, it's the mother concept, which shows us, which provides our principles from which environmental management then goes. Because environmental management for me is basically that how we are going to undertake our development projects, how we are going to undertake our national development agendas, taking into consideration the tools that protect the environment. So that is it for me.
Okay. Thank you very much. Okay, Miss Agnes, can you hear me now?
Yes, I think I was able to pick it up from Dr. Amanda's submission. So
okay.
I'll just add on. So I think it's basically, for, just as Dr. Amanda mentioned, sustainability has to do, or it does not shed off or prevent economic development. So there will be economic development because, I mean, in the past or even now, there's a lot of talk about environmental justice, and there's a lot of talk about how unfair it will be to the global south if we are asked to meet certain standards, and which will of course impede on economic growth. And so to ensure equitable allocation of cost and benefits of environmental management, we've had to have discussions on how to even develop and then develop sustainably. So now for developing countries or less developed countries, we have the opportunity under sustainable development to develop while still maintaining certain environmental standards. And most of these countries, or I mean, most of us here in Africa, we've had to develop our nationally determined contributions. So even as we develop, we also try to manage our environmental, the negative aspects of our activities on the environment. So we are not going to stop industrialization. We are going to do that, but how do we do that sustainably? And sustainable development has made it easier for every sector, or almost every sector, to be able to develop very well, yet protecting the environment, having environmental management in mind. So, I mean, this is what I'll add to it.
Okay, thank you very much. Next question actually is for you because of your work. Do you think we need to have special trainings for top management of corporate organizations? Because there's been there have been a lot of challenges with in-house environmental managers having to struggle with top management buying into the need to follow regulations and possibly moving beyond just complying to environmental regulations?
Absolutely. That would be my first statement. Training is very important. And I remember, I think about 5 years ago, I used to handle training a lot, and it was something I was really, environmental training. It was something that I was really passionate about, because just as we already established, like there are a lot of activities that impact on the environment. So it's very important that even for our top management, they need to understand what is happening. And environmental regulations keep evolving. So it's very important for top management coming down to understand what is happening now, and to be able to do that. I think that is very important for every management, every member of the management team to be able to understand these things, and for every institution first subscribe to an international standard of operations. So in environmental management, we've heard a lot about ISO or ISO, International Organization for Standardization, and then we have the ECO RNT. But I mean, I'll talk more about the International Organization for Standardization, because I used to work with a company that was ISO certified. And so under ISO, it gives you the opportunity to know how the systematic way of even implementing environmental standards. So for management, it gives an information about how you can even develop your environmental management systems, how to ensure that you have standard operating procedures for every activity that has environmental aspects. And then under the environmental policy development and all that, it's very important. Training needs is very important. So these, once you subscribe to an international standard of operation, it's easy for you to ensure constant monitoring through audits, through internal audits, both internal and external audits. So you conduct your own internal audits to ensure that you are conforming. So there's no, to ensure that you limit non-conformances, and also to ensure that you are complying to all the regulations. So I think that is very important for every business, every management every management and every business to subscribe to an international standard, and not only international standards. Over here in Ghana, we have local regulators also that constantly visits businesses and organizations to ensure that they understand the environmental management systems of their operations. So yes, that's what I would say.
Okay. Thank you very much. So Dr. Amanda, my question is for you now. How can we push for, are you with me?
Yes, I am.
Oh, okay, thank you. How can we push for more involvement of local councils in the implementation of policies? Because as we all know, any policy that doesn't involve the grassroots can be hardly implemented. Because this talk about environmental management and sustainability, climate change affects most people at the remote and rural areas. How can we get them more involved? Because I've been to a number of conferences in Nigeria here, and we only have people from the federal ministries and the state ministries, and hardly anyone from the local councils, and we can't achieve anything without involving them.
Thank you very much. For that, for me, there is a concept which is more familiar for in the tourism sector and sustainable tourism, which they call local control. And local control basically is what you are asking: how can we have the local people to control their environmental governance, right? And local control basically is also, first of all, defining who are our stakeholders at local level. That is very important because, here in Africa, we have local authorities, then we have traditional authorities. I don't know about West Africa and perhaps North Africa, but here in Southern Africa, that divide between local authorities, you know, the government bodies and traditional authorities and the traditional communities is very important. Now, once that is established, who are our stakeholders at local level? Once you know who your stakeholders are at local level in any given area, then you must, like Agnes said, you must engage them. It is very important. And you know, another dynamic that happens here in Southern Africa, especially, is when you're talking of local community, it can be a very heterogeneous phenomenon. It's not homogeneous. It's not all traditional people. It's some people who come from other countries and have resided in the rural areas. It's people who are coming from urban to rural. It's the indigenous people. It's just a lot of people. So we need to identify, first of all, who our actors are at local level. Once we identify them at local level, we engage with each one of those groups at their level, asking them, like Agnes said, what is your understanding of this policy objective that we want to achieve? And if we engage, when local people are accepted, when local people are included, and when they recognize that they are in fact being recognized and their decision making is indeed being taken into consideration, then you find that they become very proactive. There's a very popular program that you may be aware of in Southern Africa called Campfire, where we had communal land ownership, community-based natural resource management. It was very successful in the 1980s to the 1990s. Why? Because the people that initiated that initiative, it was actually not the government, but it was private actors who realized the importance of engaging communities when it comes to natural resource management. So what they did was to start with the communities and tell them, look, when we want to use your resources, this is what we want to do, and this is what we want to achieve. What do you feel? What do you think? And then they start to raise these issues about ownership of land. They start to raise these issues about rights, what their rights are, what their expectations are. They begin to raise what they want to, how and what they want to benefit. And to the extent that communities were allowed to participate in this initiative, it was very successful. But over the years, when governments began to exclude, they began to monopolize this very successful program, the communities take a step back and they become antagonistic. And this is where it fails. So it's important to identify the local actors, then you get their buy-in, local control. When you give them that control, then it becomes successful. Apart from that, it's very difficult.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Amanda. Miss Agnes, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Yeah. What can you say about the current environmental laws we have across Africa? Are they in tune with our current realities, or we need new laws, or probably some reforms?
To be very honest, I mean, in my opinion, I think that we are in tune as far as knowledge of the law is concerned, as in, I mean, with the regulators, in tune with the current environmental laws, because constantly, I mean, we have our African leaders participating in international conferences. They are constantly being updated about the new regulations or the new laws, the new treaties that are coming up. So, I mean, people, our regulators or our government institutions are very much aware of the new developments, and then constantly they are training themselves and they are updating themselves with the new trends of environmental laws and policies and legal instruments that's come up. Yes, so I think we are in tune. The only challenge that we have already mentioned is of course with implementation and training. You know, training up there, it's okay, but down there, that's where we have the problem. So Dr. Amanda just mentioned the involvement of indigenous people and all that in the training and even in implementation. So I think that we are in tune. The only challenge
Hello?
that I think enforcement, I think it's one of the bigger challenges. Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much. So, Doctor, okay, this question is actually for the two panelists present. I'd like you to answer this question. What does a post-COVID world look like for you? What do you want to see? With respect to environmental management, of course. So, Dr. Amanda, please.
Okay, I will, you know, I've actually not really considered, with respect to the environment, I cannot say you can actually see a significant, you know, distinction between pre-COVID and post-COVID, because I believe that, you know, the environment remains the environment, COVID or not COVID. So, the question for me is not necessarily about post-COVID, but it's about how we continuously engage with our environment, you know, as and when we have, you know, different natural phenomena happening. So with that in mind, I actually want to go back to what Agnes was answering to, as to that, are we in tune? And for me, it's a yes and no situation. To the extent that Agnes has said we are in tune, I am in agreement. But to the extent that it relates to issues of political will, you know, when she was answering about should top management officials be trained in environmental management, etc., I was thinking we actually need our presidents to be trained. You know, we actually need our ministers to be trained about these things, because the environment speaks to everything. It speaks to an entire territory, and if the more we don't put that into our understanding of politics, into our understanding of governance, the whole spectrum of governance, the moment we still exclude environment, we are constantly going to be faced with situations when natural disasters, or when things like COVID throw themselves to us, we just don't know what to do. So I think this whole issue of capacity building, training, awareness, mainstreaming of environmental governance into our whole, you know, I don't know, spectrum of lives, that is important. We really just need everybody to be on board, everybody to recognize that environmental issues are very serious issues. So, I mean, it's just, it's everywhere. The answer is just all over the show, but simply saying that if we are going to have a political will involved, we need our governments to appreciate the importance of the environment. And when they do that, the next time something like COVID happens, at least we will know how to engage with our environment. We know how to engage with people within our environment, because people are also the environment. So I think that this is just a very broad answer to post-COVID scenarios.
Thank you very much. So, Ms. Agnes, what do you think? Miss Agnes?
Yeah.
Okay. Wow. Okay. I think we lost Miss Agnes there. Okay, so while we wait for her to come back on, okay. I think we have her back.
Hello.
Yeah. Yeah. I can hear you.
Hello.
Yes, you're here. You're here.
Hello.
You are here.
Hello. Please can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Good. So I could actually hear everything that was saying, and it was unfortunate that you couldn't hear me. So yes, I couldn't agree less with Dr. Amanda on this, that for our politicians, for our government, even for our presidents, they all need training. And one very sad thing that I have realized is that most of the time when we organize trainings and conferences, environmental trainings and conferences, is more like just to tick boxes that we have done these, not necessarily actively getting ourselves involved and mainstreaming, just as Dr. Amanda mentioned. So we don't attend these conferences and trainings to get enlightened, but we attend these conferences and trainings just to get to take the boxes that, oh, we have done this, oh, we have done that. After that, what happens? After the trainings, what happens? Nothing happens. We just take the boxes that it's been done. So I think that, like she said, it's not really about before COVID and post-COVID. We have to do this each and every day of our lives. These activities, these enforcement, implementation, everything we have to continue doing. You mentioned that one of the major challenges that we have identified as far as COVID and environmental management is concerned has to do with waste management. And especially because we've had to use certain things just once and throw them away, no mask, these items that are used in the hospital. COVID is not over. I mean, we are still in this COVID era. So how are we even managing them now? We don't have to wait until COVID is completely over, where we found a vaccine. Then we find ourselves coming back to find a way of addressing waste management issues. So even now, how are we managing the waste from our hospitals as far as COVID, the protective gears are concerned? So we have to start it now. We don't have to wait until this whole season of COVID is over. Yes.
Oh, yeah, thank you very much. So before I move on to the next question, I would like to give the representative of the Swedish Embassy some minutes to make some quick remarks.
Hello, do you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Great. Good afternoon. Good morning, actually. My name is Shay, and I'm representing Axel Angren, who unavoidably has to jump into another meeting. Today is the International Day of the Girl Child, and we have another program with Plan International. So Axel is on that, and he's asked me to just be a part of this. It's been really interesting to have listened to the conversation so far. Very intrigued by the quality of the conversation. As an environmentalist myself, I understand clearly that people will not do good because it's the right thing to do. So there is a need for these policies, there's a need for these laws in place. Not just the existence of these laws, but that they are enforced and that people are also, educated about these things and why it is important. And this is what I believe that this conversation will be able to add up to. So I'm very excited to see what the output of this conversation is. And as the embassy, to on our own part, see how we can support, increase the education and also support the implementation here in Nigeria. We're very happy to share some of the Swedish experiences. And in the forthcoming weeks, the two second, third, and fourth episodes, we hope to have some Swedish resource persons to also contribute and share some of our experiences and how it can be localized here in Nigeria. So this is about my thoughts. I just want to say thank you for the great work you do at 111112 Foundation. Thanks.
Thank you very much for that remark. So we'll go back to our questions. We'll be rounding up the discussion session very soon and give room for questions from other people listening in. So there has been talks about the effect COVID-19 has had on the environment. Yes, there's been some upsides. The pollution has emissions have reduced in the places where the virus spread a lot because people had to stay back in, people didn't drive and all of that. However, there's been high generation of single-use plastic. I would like Dr. Amanda to tell us what effects COVID-19 has had on the environment.
Speaking from our perspective in Zimbabwe, there's something that became very clear when we were hit by COVID this side, and this was issues to do with access to water. Okay. I am telling you, it just became very obvious that our governments, or as a people, we have not been addressing issues with respect to water. All of a sudden, everybody needed to have water in order to wash our hands, in order to keep our environment, clean. And access to water has not been universal in our country, and I know also within the SADC region, because I know in South Africa as well, it was a very difficult situation, as well as Mozambique. For instance, South Africa and South Africa, Namibia, and Zimbabwe, we are water scarce countries. So just making sure that everybody has access to water every day was such a challenge for local municipalities, for instance. And for the first couple of months, they really tried to make sure everybody has water. But as the pandemic has progressed, it has become very difficult to make sure that all communities in every region, rural, urban, have access. Another thing that I also noticed and that became very clear was access to healthcare. As an environmental issue, making sure that people's human well-being is ensured in this COVID situation became something that became obvious that we were lacking. So some of these rights, access to water, access to healthcare, access to food, it's in our country, just to access food during the COVID became a very difficult situation. There's some communities that could not actually access basic commodities like bread, like your milk, the basic foodstuffs that we would need. So these environmental rights facets of environmental well-being became very obvious that they are not easily accessible in our country. And I know I can speak the same for our neighboring countries, South Africa, Mozambique, Namibia, Zambia. So this is what has become very obvious for us in our region, that basic human rights and to the extent that they relate to environmental rights, environmental well-being, a satisfactory environment, that has become obvious that it has been lacking going forward. So this is what I can say.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Okay, can I please add
yes,
to it?
Please go on.
Hello.
Please go on. Please
yes,
go on.
I was asking if I could add to it. So, with regards to access to water, I mean, during COVID, I mean, it was evident that everybody needed water, and so over here in Ghana, I mean, back to governance issues and the basic environmental needs of each citizen. Over here in Ghana, we had our president, free water for or for about 4 months, people were not paying for the water that was being used, the economic impact on people's activities, and so people could not even pay for their water. And
Hello. Oh, I think we lost. Okay, no, she's here. Agnes, can you hear me? Agnes, are you here? Okay. While we wait for Agnes to. Agnes, can you hear me?
hello.
Okay.
Yes, please.
Miss
I can.
Agnes?
Can you hear me?
Okay. Yes, I can now. Sorry about your internet interruption.
I'm really sorry. I don't know what happened. Hello.
Yeah, I can hear you. Can hear you.
Hello.
I can hear you loud and clear. Oh, we lost that. We lost her again. We lost her again. Okay, so while we wait for her, Dr. Amanda, I would like you to tell us about important determinants of the outcome of policy making for policy making process for environmental issues.
Okay, let me just jot that down quickly. Important determinants of the outcome of
the policy making process for environmental issues.
Okay.
Yeah.
Just very loosely, without a particular order, I think one of the most important determinants is to know whether there was sufficient meaningful engagement with stakeholders. If we do not have that engagement with stakeholders and their feedback, because it's one thing to say that we engaged with stakeholders, but it's really quite another thing when you do take time to get feedback once the policy is out there, and then you see the responses from your stakeholders with respect to that policy. That is what becomes a very important determinant, because in many instances you do find that there is a policy or a law that's out there, but people just act as if it's not there. Another very key indicator, for instance, is to look at the levels of litigation. Litigation is also a very good determinant of policy outcome. If we do not have a case law, and here I'm really just speaking like a lawyer, because this is much of what I do. But when you don't have litigation around the issues that have been provided for in law and policy, then you know that there is a problem. So litigation becomes a very important issue with respect to as an important determinant of policy making. Also, one other thing that I think is important is the basic change of behavior by proponents out there, perhaps project proponents, etc. Once you have that change in behavior, then obviously you can tell that the policy making process was in place. You know how it is when there is a law that is implemented, or a policy that is implemented, and the stakeholders are quick to begin to align themselves to that law or policy. Then you know that there's been a response to the policy, and people will respond when they've been engaged. People will respond when enough awareness has been made over that issue. You do. So very loosely, I think these are the key. I mean, from a legal perspective, you want to have had enough engagement with all stakeholders. Then the feedback, the actual law or policy that becomes the overall outcome, must reflect the contributions of all the stakeholders that were present. And then finally, at implementation stage, if you need litigation, for instance, as a sign to show that there is something happening. People have responded, there's work being done, and then there's also issues now beginning to arise before the courts and issues being addressed, because policy making also then ends up in the courts, isn't it? Because courts then play that role of developing the law in that perspective. So from this is a very legal answer, but for me, this is what it means.
Thank you very much, Dr. Amanda. Ms. Agnes, do you have anything to add to that?
Okay, so I'm back now, and unfortunately, yeah. I don't think got the question. I didn't get the question because I was still on even finish what I was saying. So
okay, yeah. Actually,
I don't know whether you would want me to go back to what I was talking about.
Yes, please do.
Yeah, so I think I'll just finish off with that. So I was saying that over here in Ghana, we had our government giving us the opportunity to enjoy water for free. So we're not paying for water. But then the question or the challenge was with people who were not having access to water at all. So for some of us, we could access water. So if you gave us the opportunity not to pay for water, it was good for us. But how about those people that were not even getting water at all? And that brings us back to what Dr. Amanda was talking about. Yeah, there's water scarcity, or there's not enough water for everyone, countrywide. So how do we address that? And one other challenge aside access to water is the hospitals. They are able to have bins, and not just the hospitals. I'm sure that in the formal sectors, they had bins that were dedicated to, for instance, like nose mask or any other tissues that were used for, or that are used, when you use that for your nose and you know that you need to throw it off, that are infected or whatever, we had bins for such. But how about the informal sector? How do we throw away our waste? In my home, we have like bins that take every kind of waste. So we're just mixing the waste like that, and we dispose everything together. Both the contaminated waste and then the other, municipal solid waste, when it comes to food waste and all that, we put everything together. So at the end of the day, when it gets to the landfill sites, there's no sorting, there's nothing. So as far as waste management is concerned, and this time around, because of COVID, even in our homes, we were producing hazardous waste, because most of these waste that, when we dispose of our nose masks and our tissues, they were infected. So how were we managing, or how are we even managing those wastes now? So I think that's the challenge that these challenges that I will talk about. And like I mentioned, I don't think I heard the question that Dr. Amanda was answering to.
Oh, the question was that what are the important determinants of the outcomes of the policy-making process for environmental issues? Did you get that? Okay.
Determinants?
Yes.
I think that, the main determinant is in the attitude of the people after these policies have been developed or implemented. How are the people responding to it in their day-to-day activities? How do you see them? How do you see the standard operating procedures that people actually apply to these activities that have environmental aspects? And for formal sectors, again, we develop training needs for particular activities. So for instance, if I am a mechanic and I deal with a lot of oil spills, when you visit my workspace, you should be able to see how I'm managing oil spills. How do I dispose of the oil spills. If I am a health worker, how do I dispose of the disposable items that I use? So in our day-to-day activities, it should be evident how we respond to environmental aspects of our activities, or how we react to these things. So that's what I would say again. Yeah.
Thank you very much. We already have questions on the Q&A box, which I will attend to after we round up this this discussion panel. We just have about two more questions. It's very sad that Dr. Inyabo could not join us for the panel discussion. So I already transferred these questions to both of you, and you've done very well. You've done very well. Thank you very much. So we know that developing countries in particular, they struggle with governance at all levels, the national, state, and the local levels. How do we ensure that environmental policies can still be implemented regardless of all these governance issues? So I'd like Dr. Amanda to take that. And Ms. Agnes can also chip in. She has contribution.
You know, that's a very tricky question to answer, because it's almost like, you know, you keep going round and round when you're trying to come up with a you know, clear answer. You know, governance issues in developing countries, without even talking about environmental governance issues in our region are very problematic. So once we have good governance in place, you know, when we have good governance in place, your good governance are looking at all those principles that relate to legitimacy, issues that relate to transparency, accountability, inclusivity, all those principles, you know, take their center stage when it comes to, they must take their center stage in our region. So good governance is important. Now, within that good governance, when you then you know, focus on environmental governance, those issues, you know, bring to the fore the importance of having environmental issues at the fore. And I keep going back to the same answer, which is mainstreaming. And really, let me try and define mainstreaming very loosely here. Mainstreaming is simply saying that whenever we're going to come up with whatever developmental agenda, we must incorporate environmental protection, we must incorporate poverty alleviation and the basic social development issues, right? So when you're looking at whatever, you know, from the time that a government begins to sit and say, so what do we want to achieve as a government? Mainstreaming becomes very important. And from an environmental perspective, mainstreaming environmental issues is very important. If that is not done, then obviously by the time you go to the grassroots level, to local communities, it's very difficult to see that people adhere to these things. But you also then find that there are certain communities, there are certain local sphere activities that actually are more proactive with environmental governance than national. But if that disjuncture is there, when the national government does not mainstream, even local level initiatives for environmental action, which sometimes are very good, or even private sector initiatives, you know, businesses like Agnes mentioned that banks these days are now doing a lot. But if that mainstreaming is not there at national level, for me, that is the answer. As long as we don't mainstream, and that mainstream, like I said, must be done under the scope of good governance. At the end of the day, you also find this very difficult challenge of corruption. And that also is just another can of worms. So these and that, but it also comes back to good governance. We need good governance, under good governance, environmental governance, how is that achieved? Mainstreaming. That is the answer for me.
Thank you very much, Dr. Amanda. Ms. Agnes, do you have anything to contribute, or I just throw my next okay, I have just one more after this one. Just one more. I hope you don't mind. Okay, Agnes?
No,
okay.
I think you can.
Okay. Okay. So finally, we'll say, I'm sure that with every problem, we're encouraged as the environmental managers to see environmental problems as opportunities to create solutions. With COVID-19 exposing our fragilities with respect to environmental resources, what opportunities do you think are in this sector that entrepreneurs or people can just tap into and come up with solutions that are actionable, actually? Miss Agnes.
Hello, and please can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Did you get the question?
Okay. I'm not too sure. I got everything, but I think I got bits and pieces of it. So I'll answer the bits and pieces I got.
Okay, no problem. Or you want me to go again?
Right. Well, you can, but I think I heard you ask about the opportunities, right?
Yes.
Great. So, I think that, once you have the opportunity to even identify a problem, I think it's the best way to go. So to identify that there's a problem, to identify that there's a challenge, it's a way to, getting it resolved or getting it solved. So the good thing is that COVID-19, even before COVID-19, we were exposed to the fact that our environmental management systems were not good enough. So just as Dr. Amanda said, it's not necessarily just COVID that exposed us. We were already exposed before COVID. And so constantly, I think that once we've been able to identify these challenges, it's important for us to get ourselves abreast with the new developments in environmental management. That's the first thing. And the second thing I would say is that it's very important to develop the various training needs that each institution or each organization that have environmental aspects would need to be able to actually ensure that they are developing, or their activities are sustainable. Good. To ensure that their activities are sustainable. So for instance, if you are in the banking sector, if you are in the health sector, if you are in the mining sector, it's important to identify the training needs, not just of the sector, but of the individuals that work in the sector. So for instance, if it's the mining sector, for a mechanic, for the environment department, for the health department of the institution, it's very important to identify the training needs of each and every one of them. And I remember that about 3 years ago, 3 or 5 years ago, which I still believe that is being done in the mining sector, and for trainings that were conducted, it wasn't a one-time training that was conducted for people that worked over there. So even if you go on leave and you return from leave, you have to come back and do a training, because we believe that probably in the 1 month that you were away, things have changed in the mine. So constantly, people have to allow themselves or give themselves the opportunity to be trained. People must read, because there's a lot of information out there every day. There's a lot of information out there every day. So we read, we get ourselves abreast with the new development in environmental management, and then we go ahead and then have our people trained in these developments.
Okay, thank you very much, Ms. Agnes. And I'll say that just to keep up with the time, I think we'll just round up the panel session. It's been really engaging and insightful. And I would like to thank Dr. Amanda, giving us the law and policy perspective very well, and Ms. Agnes too. You did wonderfully well. Thank you very much for making time. However, we have about 6 questions from our listeners. I would like us to run through those in 20 minutes, run through the 6 questions, and we'll move from there. So the first question is it's anonymous. It says, is there a lesson to be learned as regards to COVID-19 from an environmentalist perspective? So anyone can answer that.
Absolutely, that's what I would say. There's a lot of lessons to be learned, and I think just a while ago, Dr. Amanda and I mentioned access to water. I mean, we got to know, we've always known that there was a challenge to accessing water, especially here in Africa. So I mean, in the bigger cities they have water, but I mean in the local areas or in the villages, they were challenged with accessing water, and not just water, but good water. And here is the case that now people, I mean, here in Ghana, we have people still bathing in rivers and streams. And so now we know that you cannot even do that. It's not even healthy to do that, because you can have a COVID patient or someone who has been infected bathing in that same water. So it was a good thing for us, or it's still a good thing for us all to learn that every country here in Africa needs to ensure, our governments need to ensure that there's constant water, and not just constant access to water, but clean water. Clean water is very important. And also, I mean, I mentioned the waste management, that we should be able to manage our waste, and even sorting of our waste management. I mean, one major aspect of waste management is being able to sort the hazardous waste from the other kind of waste that we generate. And so I think there's a lot of lessons, but I'll talk about just these.
Okay.
I don't know if Dr. Amanda.
Okay, Dr. Amanda wants to say something.
Yes, in addition to what Agnes has said, already what came to my mind is that, we also have issues about town planning. In our country, what became very obvious was the crowding of marketplaces, the crowding of people in certain areas. It became a very hazardous thing with the COVID. So even issues of town planning became such an issue. We had to ask ourselves, where we put our markets. Is it healthy? Is it safe? And we found that a lot of informal traders and the informal sector suffered very much from these issues. So it's that the issues of town planning, it's issues of infrastructural development, it's issues of transport. So a lot of things became very clear with the COVID. There's a lot of lessons that we have learned, I believe, as a country, as a region, that infrastructure development, investing in our infrastructure is very important, because where then, for instance, you would have the movement of people on roads, it just became, it was now no longer possible. And how then do people move if they still want to move, if they still want to make business when there's a pandemic like this one? How about transport, the transport sector, public transport? How available is it? How many people move in public transport? So there is a lot of things that we have had to learn, and I think that as governments, as different sectors, we really need to reconsider how even doing business. There's a lot that we have learned, that you can actually do a lot of business, at home, online, and all these issues are also opportunities, going back to your previous question, for environmentalists. We as environmental, people in the environmental fraternity, there's a lot of opportunities for us to take up going forward. So yes, there've been so many lessons. The list is endless.
Okay, thank you very much for that deep answer.
Yeah, and I think to add to Dr. Amanda is just talking about, sorry.
It's fine, go on, please.
Yes.
Go on, please, go on.
Hello.
Hello, I can hear you.
Yeah, so I was adding to what Dr. Amanda was about. So as far as working from home is concerned, now we know that we don't all have to drive to work. So we can actually reduce the number of cars that move in a day. We all stay at home. We limit the amount of carbon monoxide that we throw out into the environment to pollute the air that we have. So we can actually have companies having some of their workers stay off, so they can actually run shifts in a week. So in a week we have if we have 10 workers, we come in. So I think that's why environmentalists, we can actually push for businesses to start doing this, so that we reduce the traffic, we reduce the emissions from our transport system. So I think, like Dr. Amanda said, there's a lot to learn.
Okay. So quickly, we'll run through the remaining 5 questions. We'll have quick, brief answers, so we don't run out of time. So the next question is, some will say, it's from Chris Button. It says, some will say implementing very good laws and policies require a whole lot of funds. Could this be a major reason why Africa and other developing nations are struggling too? So who's going to take that? Okay, thank you, Dr. Amanda.
Okay, I can go on quickly to that. What I realized in our country is that we are not short of funds. We are short of, agendas, because we are short of political will, we're short of the agenda. What agenda do we drive? Because whenever there is an agenda to drive, the funding is there. Funding is channeled into whatever agenda that the politicians want to drive. So it's agenda, it's political will. I have come to a point where I've refused that Africa is poor. We have natural resources. We have abundance of natural resources. If you look at the grand scale corruption that happens in our region, and it's not only about our region, but just focusing on our region. If you look at the grand scale corruption that's happening in our region, I cannot say that it's about limited funding. There's so much funding, and to our own, wealth, we do have a lot of developmental, assistance from outside. And what stops, environmental agendas being driven is simply political will, simply, government agendas, ideologies that are misplaced. So for me, I cannot accept funding. I think it's an old excuse, personally.
All right, thank you very much. So, okay, like Miss Agnes wants to say something. Miss Agnes,
yes,
are you
I
on?
completely agree again with Dr. Funding is never a problem. And even in the renewable energy sector, where I get to work with a lot of project developers, they always talk about how there isn't enough funding in the sector for them. And I always tell them the problem is not you developing good, business models that are attractive to the funders to be able to decide to actually fund your project. So I don't think implementation, the challenge with implementation has to do with funding. There's actually a lot of funding out there. And with the commitments of the global north to the global south, they are constantly making sure that there's money enough to ensure good implementation of these policies or these laws that we develop for our environmental protection. So there's funding, but we need to ensure that we are ready to actually use this funding very well to actually address these issues of concern as far as the environment is concerned. So I don't think funding is a challenge, just as Dr. Amanda mentioned.
Okay. So thank you very much. Now, the next question is from an anonymous person. It says, the private sector, which forms a major part of the problem we have in the environment, controls a whole lot of finance, and they use this to influence policymakers negatively. How can we mitigate or even stop this?
Okay, so I'll come in on this. We know, I mean, to be very honest, the government cannot do this alone. And it's very important that the private sector gets involved in this. And so it's important for us to get them to understand why it's very important to protect the environment. And to be very honest, in our days now, really do anything without, because before you penny or to start an NGO or whatever in any country, you have to the EPA. With most of the things, just as I think in the beginning we mentioned that almost every activity that is conducted here in every country have environmental aspects. So once they have environmental aspects, you would have to engage the EPA. So if these private sectors get to EPA or Environmental Protection Agency, they ensure that they are also aligning or conforming to the standards. The EPA is also supposed to ensure, they have to ensure that these private environmental management systems are up to date and they're actually putting in effort towards ensuring that the activities do not have negative or adverse impact on the environment. So the private sector, they have a major role to play, and right from the beginning of their session into or ensuring that establishment of their businesses, the government authorities or the regulators must ensure that their business structure is very inclusive. So it has to have clear policies or very clear objectives that is geared towards protecting the environment as well. And they have monies dedicated. So for instance, I'll talk again about the mining sector, where rehabilitation should be part of your activities. So rehabilitation, so you cannot just clear a land and start mining. If you clear a land, you have to dedicate another land to revegetate or to regrow the trees that you have cut out. So right from the beginning where a private sector decides to embark on any project or to start any business in any country, the regulators must ensure that they are dedicated to environmental management. All their activities, they have dedicated monies to. So even for the mining sectors, they have to, I think, annually set aside some monies for rehabilitation in case the mine even decides to close today. There's money in there to ensure that the land that was degraded is reformed back to its natural state, if not 100%, at least to a degree that is environmental friendly.
Okay, thank you very much. We have about 3 or 4 more questions. Quickly, someone asked that in implementing environmental laws, should we go the route of advocacy and enlightenment or use the enforcement tactics? Dr. Amanda, please.
There is no one, method that would work. A combination of methods is important. Both are important. Advocacy, you also need enforcement. So everything brought together is very short and specific answer is that a combination of everything is important.
Okay, okay, thank you very much. So there are two more questions. So an anonymous attendee asked that how can the citizens influence environmental policy making? Dr. Amanda, please.
Okay. Citizens' participation in policy making, first of all, we must have citizens that have access to information. So it goes back to the governments. Are we making information accessible? Are we allowing for public participation? Because having those structures for public participation, for access to information is what will make citizens participate. And Agnes did mention it from the word go that, you know, awareness is important. If you want citizens to participate in any lawmaking process, make it open for them, open it to the public and make it genuine, you know, make it genuine, make the people know that their efforts are needed, and the effort, the going the extra mile at every stage is important. So that is my very short answer.
Okay, thank you very much. So we'll have a last question before we'll round up the Q&A session. Ms. Agnes, please take this. How do we make sure that environmental laws are enforced? Ms. Agnes?
I hear you.
You can hear me say, yeah. I said, how do we ensure that
Hello.
environmental laws, can you hear me? Can you hear me?
I can hear you, but your line keeps breaking a bit, but I think it's a bit stable now.
Yeah. How do we make sure that environmental laws are enforced?
Please, what's the question again?
How do we make sure that environmental laws are enforced? Did you get that?
Are enforced?
Yes, yes. How do you make sure
So the
environmental
question
laws
is
are
that environmental laws are enforced?
Yes, yes.
Okay. So I would say that we have to use both the carrot and stick, just as Dr. We need both advocacy and also, so it's very important to use the carrot and stick. We have to, sanctions are very important. And I realized that over here in Africa, environmental sanctions, apart from the sanctions that we give to the formal sector, for the informal sector, there's no sanctions as far as, or there isn't much sanctions as far as enforcement is concerned with environmental management. So we have people loitering, we have people disposing, here in Ghana, we have people disposing of waste in gutters. And there isn't, I mean, hardly would you see that these people are being taken to court to actually pay for the damage they are causing to the environment. So I think that we have to apply sanctions to ensure that people are actually conforming to environmental standards. And then we have to also give rewards for businesses that are doing well as far as environmental management is concerned. So I think that these two can help with enforcement of environmental environmental system.
Okay, thank you very much. And Ms. Agnes just answered the last question. And so that brings us to the end of the Q&A session. And next up is closing remarks. And if I'm being honest, I really had a good time moderating this panel session because I've learned a lot. You know, our panelists talked about mainstreaming environmental management, stakeholders identification, stakeholders engagement, local control. That's actually caught my attention. having political will and sufficient training for even our presidents, because it has to come without top manager. President is like the CEO of the country. Without having the buy-in of top management, the most committed environmental manager cannot be successful in implementing any policies in any company. The most committed environmental officer in any ministry or local government would have a tough time doing his or her job if there is no top management commitment. On this note, I'd like to thank the EET Foundation for having me moderate this session and also bringing a platform together for conversations like this to happen. I also thank the Swedish Embassy for taking time to partner with the EET Foundation. On that note, I would like to have final remarks from our panelists, like on where we go from here. We've had this discussion. What next? What happens next? So, Ms. Agnes.
Okay. I'll speak first, and I would say that I hope that this will not be one of the items on our list that we wanted to do for the year, to organize like a webinar like this and then just get it ticked that something like this has been organized. But actually, you mentioned some bullet points that you had put down, and so we actually go out there to implement some of these things and even encourage other people to do same. So we will not just tick the boxes, but we'll make sure that this discussion that we've had will actually impact in our day-to-day activities, even at EET.
Okay, so Dr. Amanda, you're next up.
Thank you very much for the opportunity to participate in this very insightful webinar. And I think for me, the take home is really, like Agnes has said, that it shouldn't be just some other event that, a tick box event in everything. But it is our goal to be able to have these kind of engagements influence, influence a more broader audience, hoping that these discussions reach the relevant authorities, these discussions reach governments, the private sector, they reach civil society, and we have everybody buying into these ideas that come up in these discussions, and hopefully end up with a region, Africa, that is very proactive with respect to environmental governance. For me, this is it. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much for those for your final remarks. And on that note, we'll come to the end of this webinar. It's actually this is a 4-part webinar series, and this is just the first part. I'd like to thank everyone once again for joining in. We'll have brilliant panelists, brilliant questions, brilliant answers. And on this note, I'd like to say goodbye.
Thank you, goodbye.